All right. Welcome to CO300. The goal today is to have a better understanding of audience and constraints, which are the two biggest parts of Bitzer's rhetorical model. So we're going to look at audience constraints and how, actually should probably be separated, audience and the constraints within the audience and how that looks, and then kind of understand how that works with common ground, and discuss Swift and see how that relates to what's coming up in class. This week on Friday, you're going to do a rhetorical analysis of David Maschiotra's piece, The Real Problem with Hooking Up is Bad Sex, which is I think a compelling argument, at least to begin thinking about social culture on college campuses and how that might change over time. It's also kind of an engaging read, and it's short so that we can focus more on constraints of people who are reading and what kinds of audiences that piece would appeal to and why. On Monday, we're reading a piece on peer review. And so looking forward to next week, our focus on next week is really getting better at peer review, because you have on Wednesday, there's a soft due date for a draft of your first project that I'm going to encourage you, if you want to work on and ask questions on that before Wednesday's class. But your first workshop or your first essay, the first draft of your essay is due on Friday before class. You're going to comment on 3 peers' work due by Friday, at the end of Friday, and then you have over the weekend and all day Monday to revise and finish your final essay with the self-assessment. This is in module 4, so there is a rubric for the rhetorical for the essay that's basically the same hierarchy we went over: purpose and content, that content is compelling and convincing, show me that you understand what's going on there, that you integrate the source material for your evidence, that's nice outlines, organized and clear style, and that it looks consistent for academic work. So that's all in Canvas, and we're going to be working on that more moving forward. But I did want to today basically is look at why we read Swift and how that works for us. So as an example, to understand audience better, really. So any questions over any of that? All right. What was Swift's argument in that piece? So unless anyone has something else that you would like to discuss. All right, so this is, what page are we on? So around, mainly looking at 42. So Swift's argument, and I actually think she's kind of making 2 arguments. What did we get for her argument, or anything that stood out to you about this piece?
I don't really know if it's like an argument, but Swift was saying that the Redders are both the creator of the t-shirt and the people wearing the t-shirt.
Yes.
And then there's 2 audiences. One of them is the people that are pro-life, and the other one's people that are pro-choice.
Yes.
So I don't really know how that weighs into like an argument, but that's just kind of what I did.
Nope, I think that's super helpful to point out, and I think it is going to, it's going to connect for sure. What else? So I'm making a note of it, and I do think that is part of her argument.
I think in a more broader sense, she was looking at like Bitzer's model, and she concluded that it was an effective tool to use to look at the rhetoric provided by the shirt. And then also she talks about like, was the rhetoric of the shirt appropriate, kind of like looking at Bitzer's model again.
And what did she conclude of whether or not it was appropriate?
She said it was.
So those are the two claims that I identified as well. Claim number one, that Bitzer's model actually works, that we can use Bitzer's model to understand rhetoric and also paint the way for other wearable rhetoric in the future. If I was doing a better job, I would have come to class today with a t-shirt that said something like, I don't know, some slogan that is rhetorical, like it's in the syllabus maybe, or I should have got a better joke than that, or something that matters more. Or maybe I could have wore a red hat with white letters. Anyway, but I did not. I chose to wear a I went extra professor today to make a rhetorical claim. Okay, and then he said claim 2 was the shirt was effective, or the t-shirt was effective. This is the argument that you're going to be making in your analysis. And in fact, I would just copy that down into your notes, and that you can basically, one of the things that we can copy from Swift is how she sets up what she's doing. So if this is the claim that you're basically going to say that this t-shirt was an effective piece of rhetoric, and it gets more complicated thanks to Nick's point that there actually are different groups involved here, particularly the two audience groups, pro-choice and pro-choice. We're gonna maybe get to this, but I have a really hard time with these labels. I think they're very misleading and rhetorically driven just on their own. Okay, claim 2, t-shirt was an effective piece of rhetoric. Why did she say that? And now we can see her reasons. Reason 1, which would be a paragraph in your essay. Reason 2, what were her reasons why it was an effective piece or a fitting piece?
She said that it strengthened and supported the pro-choice position. She said it may not have actually contributed to legislation leading to abortion rights, but it strengthens the position of the pro-choice.
Good. And then what else? Other reasons why? Because I do think that's part of it here. She also says that there's kind of 3 reasons why it worked.
It kind of makes the person wearing it commit and go all in, because it is an I statement on the shirt. So it really proves who the rhetor is, and they're saying that I had an abortion, and so it ties them in with everyone else that's also wearing the shirt.
Yes.
So her language is, she says in quotations, I language is what she calls that. It's taking ownership.
Fantastic. Other reasons why? It seems there's kind of 2 some weird claims in here. She says that it was effective because the t-shirt was sold out, though it was unknown how many t-shirts were available to begin with. If you only printed 10 of them and they sold out, I'm not sure how good of evidence that is. But beside that, on the argument that Bitzer's model provides an excellent lens to analyze the t-shirt's rhetorical effectiveness for its implications. So if we're looking at what made it effective, yes, it does. It does achieve its goal, strengthens the position. It might not lead to legislative action, but what was it that made it effective according to Bitzer's model? She says, first, there's a clear exigence. And that clear exigence was part of she talks about the timing that it came out in. that there are imperfections that must be addressed with both sides, right?
It came up before the 2004 Women's March, right? Is that what it was?
Correct. So we have the clear exigence that she brought in was women's rights movements and Women's March. Upcoming election where women's rights was going to be debated and on the ballot. That there was already pro-choice and pro-choice and pro-life groups were working to advance their goals. As another way, that's kind of my paraphrase of the fact that they both found something wrong with the situation. Both sides have consistently identified imperfections to be addressed. The primary imperfection of the pro-life camp is the fact that abortion remains legal. For the pro-choice camp, the primary imperfection is that abortion rights are constantly being challenged. So different groups had different exigencies there. That's the part that I would quote at the bottom of 42. For the pro-choice groups, it is the abortion rights are being challenged. For the pro-life groups, it's that abortions are still legal when they shouldn't be. And that hints, that actually kind of set up to see that these two different groups have two different problems they're trying to address, brings into kind of relief the rest of the argument. So then she says on 43, second, there is a very specific rhetorical audience that the t-shirt is aimed at. She says that the audience must have some ability towards attaining agency in the situation and making a change. The t-shirt is aimed both at those who support the availability of abortion and those who oppose it. So again, she does a nice move where that the second specific audience is actually two kinds. That there is the pro-choice and the pro-life. Okay, and then we were in a position to see what her real third reason was. What was it that made the t-shirt really work? If we have established that there's a clear exigence, a problem needing addressed, there's an audience, even though there's really actually two groups of audiences that they're writing to, people that would largely agree with the goals and objectives of Planned Parenthood, and those that would disagree or picket against the objectives of Planned Parenthood. The third reason that this t-shirt is an effective piece of rhetoric given Bitzer's model is that it
takes into account the constraints.
Actually, this isn't a direct quote. Third, that it considers constraints. And now is where we're going to get a little bit more in depth, and I hope make this conversation more relevant to way more things than just the abortion debate. What are the main constraints that she identifies? What are those constraints?
Politics is one of them.
Yes. Did we get another one? That was the main one that I saw.
Well, she said enraging people was also a constraint.
Yes, good. So emotions. Remember, part of the constraint, this is attitudes and beliefs. What else? Okay, and I'm wondering if we got this. This is one of the most, okay, so we know, do we feel like we can define constraints, right? just kind of backing up big picture, the exigence is a problem, the urgent problem that needs addressed. The audience are the people or person that are able to address the problem, that can make the change. And constraints are anything that limits that audience's ability to act. And that when we hear the word limit, that sounds negative, obviously. Like we want to kind of, we don't want our audience to be limited to act. We want to give them reasons to act. We want them to be able to act. And what's interesting here that I want to discuss is that these constraints, she says, Bitzer frames as limitations and opportunities, in the sense that constraints can be a positive thing in a rhetorical discussion. Does that make sense to anybody already? Where it's like, oh, I see that. Okay, yeah, so your constraints actually make the argument work, i.e., I'm constrained, I must act this way. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to anybody that could put it in their own words for other people who, because I feel like this is weird. This gets to be kind of weird. Or it might be anyway.
Something that stuck out to me was that she talked about she said it draws attention through linguistic construct, so it kind of like normalizes that, it makes it easier to talk about, so it gives the opportunity to like start that conversation.
She also says in that same section that not only is an opportunity for people to be empowered and emboldened who are on the pro-choice kind of side of this, but that it also forms a clear limitation for people who are adamantly anti-abortion. And I think this makes a level of intuitive sense for us. Is this shirt going to convince people who are anti-abortion to all of a sudden be okay with abortion? There's no way, right? You're not going to see that shirt and be like, oh, I'm going to actually go against everything I believe about abortion because I saw that shirt. If you already agreed with the sentiment of the shirt, might it work to begin a conversation and create more community to get more support for that movement? Do we see how a constraint, namely a belief or a political leaning, could work as a kind of an opportunity towards something, like, or against it, based on where the audience is at? Okay, we're going to kind of come back to that, because does that seem like this is kind of obviously another no-brainer, another kind of obvious one, but there's a really kind of there's some profound stuff in here. Maybe not profound is the right word, but thinking about how this works. In any issue, you might have a friendly audience. I'm going to use military terminology, even though I don't like to. A neutral audience, and a hostile audience. And this definitely works if you think of argument like I'm trying to convince you of something, or I'm trying to win this argument between you and I. You think this, I think this. If I convince you to think the way I think, I've won the argument. We're going to see as we move forward, this way of thinking about argument is actually pretty limiting, and oftentimes it just doesn't fit the situation, especially if people don't want to engage in that kind of an argument. So for a friendly audience, someone that already agrees, this is kind of like preaching to the choir, and that we hear that criticism like, yeah, that makes sense if you already think that, but they're not going to convince anybody about what they're doing. And we've probably heard that before. For a friendly audience, usually in communication, the goal is to inspire action. This is going to come up in like, so you're basically trying to get them to act. If the audience is neutral, like they don't know where they are in the situation, the goal could just be to change opinion or perspective. And if the audience is unlikely to see the situation the way that you're seeing it, the goal is just to get them to consider your position. So if I know that you already disagree, I'm not going to try to like, I'm not going to like completely try to change your mind, because I realize that that's actually going to be pretty hard for me to do. And in that sense, I think we see like kind of how the audience position is going to change the way I approach an issue. There's another thing I want to mention here. This kind of slices the audience group here into 3 camps and here into 2 camps. And I personally don't really find that very helpful. At least at the outset, a big picture, that would be okay. But do you think all pro-choice people feel the same way about abortion? I mean, broadly speaking, yes, they think that women should have a right to abortion. Do you get, I guess, do you see what do you feel like that it's more complicated? It's basically, do you feel like it's more complicated than just pro-choice or pro-life?
Yeah, I know there's issues of like people are concerned about when it's done or like if it should
Yes.
cost money or not, stuff like that. Like how old you have to be to do it, everything like that.
Under which circumstances should we allow for an abortion to happen? Who is the kind of we that gets to decide? Is it a medical doctor or the state, or should they not be involved at all? Are the circumstances of conception, should they be taken into consideration or not? Should the ability of the parents to raise the child be part of it or not? How far along should they be allowed or not? It actually gets to be a really complicated issue that seems like either or, but is not. And I think we got a good sense of that in the piece. But I did just want to say that this is a good starting point to think about it. But we see this in, I mean, I guess this is kind of my American soapbox here, that I think we've seen a lot of media that's been very divisive, and clickbait news media is kind of paints things in one or the other. You're either this or that on a whole host of issues. Those are the divisions that Russia played up in the 2016 election to kind of sow division among issues and people. So I guess I just wanted to bring up that it's usually more complicated than just one or the other here. And it's worth looking that there's different groups, right, that are have different commitments. That's kind of goes without saying, right? It's more complicated. Okay, then we're in a good position to, there's a couple other things I wanted to, we did all of this. Other sources of constraint, since this is the hardest part, I've found that students are able to really identify the exigence of a situation, and they're able to identify some of the audience situation. We could also break down audiences. I don't know if anybody's studying marketing, but audiences can be broke down in terms of age or generation. Okay, boomer versus millennials. Your education level is going to make, usually marketers will break that down. I don't know if anybody's played with Facebook advertising before, but it's crazy how much you can target ads based on how old the person is, their education level, where they live, if they're in the city or in a rural area, their political leanings or other kinds of political associations that they have, what other ways and other kind of groups or identities that we might have that separate different audiences.
Gender.
Gender. What else? Kind of group affiliations or experience, general interests. So we can separate audiences from a lot of different, in a lot of different ways. And I want you to see that in the sense that from Swift's argument that she's basically saying that the t-shirt works for some people and doesn't work for other people based on their political constraints. We're going to see that a lot. And I think the article for Friday and the article you have a choice of reading next week, you might be able to play that card as well. This rhetoric is going to work on this group, but it's not going to work on another group. This group would find it valuable, this group would not. Some people in this one might find it valuable, other people might not. That being said, so this is a way of thinking that how audiences are all separate. There are also, we could talk about the universal needs of any audience. Maybe I should say human. Although I don't know if we would ever use rhetoric on a animal. You could try, whatever. Why I put the word human in there is that there are a set of needs that we have. And this is from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but each one of these is going to be seen as a certain form of constraint. So we just looked at constraints in terms of beliefs and whether or not they already agree with the author or not. Agree, don't know, don't agree, or how old they are, where they came from, how they identify. Do we agree that basically there are universal needs that all humans have? We just try to meet those needs in separate ways. What are those needs?
Food.
Yeah, I'm gonna put that under survival.
Like food, water, shelter, and stuff.
Yep, food, water, shelter, safety. Although interestingly, this isn't on Maslow's hierarchy, I would actually put socialization up here and sleep. Considering studies that are showing that people that go in solitary confinement for an extended period of time are pretty close to not surviving. Good, what else do we need? We're gonna do Family Feud again. Let's see how well we know what we need as human beings. Quick review. Whoops.
Is one of them health?
Yep. Though you would think that that would actually that seems like survival, but this is, once you have survival, you can move on to health. And this is a sense of physical well-being. Super into this book that just came out called Breath, and the argument that we don't know how to breathe. That's really too bad, because that's the #1 way we can add decades to our life if we breathe better, namely in through our nose, open soft palate, deep into our diaphragm. So if you're interested in living longer and being healthier, check out that book by James Nestor. This also could be mental stability here. Obviously, anybody that has had any experience with depression or anxiety, it kind of gets in the way of our ability to be physically healthy as well, if you're not feeling like eating, that kind of thing. Good, other ones. We're surviving, we have our health.
Is one of them social belonging?
Yeah, it is. They have this as respect from others and esteem of others. But you're exactly going where I wanted to go in that I think this is the biggest one when we're thinking about arguing, especially if I identify with my position of being pro, actually, we'll wait on that. Let's finish this list.
Is F friends or no?
Yeah, actually, it's this one. One of my favorite posts outside a professor's door that I've seen was they had Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it has these 9 things in a triangle. And then they said the Beatles hierarchy of needs, and it just said love on it, and like it was just one. So, you know, like, but yes, affection and friendship, identification in a group, being accepted, liked, and loved. Hashtag goals. Being attractive to others. Having others as friends or objects of affection. We need that. We're missing an F, an S, an N, and a C.
Family?
Yeah, you would think that would be on here, but no, I think they're part of your social group. We need it to survive, to pay rent.
Finances.
Yes. It's not only what the way other people think about us, it's the way we think about ourselves, which is self-esteem. I like the heading of the caption on this. Meeting one's own standards in such virtues as courage, fairness, honesty, generosity, good judgment, and compassion. Meeting self-accepted obligations of one's role. I need to feel like I'm a good teacher. Otherwise, I start to really be bad to myself, for example. 7 is probably going to be hard to get. Anyone want to take a stab at it? I'll give us, it's actually 2 words, and the first word is new. Interesting recent data in psychology on how we need new experiences to feel good. And that if we just do the same thing every day, it's hard for us to thrive. They've done interesting studies that people that take different routes to work every day report being happier than people that take the same route to work every day. Interesting. Actually, we have 2. This last one, and there's 2 more. The highest level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We can survive. We're healthy. We have financial well-being. We really can develop our friendship and affection. We develop the respect and esteem of others in social groups and in our professions. We think well of ourselves. We're gaining new experiences, and now we are, this is Maslow's word, self-actualization. This is kind of Edmondson's argument as well, that not enough college is helping us at these higher levels of development. And that if our goal for college education is just to get financial well-being, we run the risk of making money, but not actually becoming who we are, which is way more expensive in terms of our mental health than the other way around. This is developing one's potential and skills and abilities. Then the last one that's interesting, I don't know why this list seems out of place to me. By the way, I'm taking this list from the Essentials of Argument, Nancy Woods, but it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need convenience, especially now, which is in time and energy. This is going to be super huge in professional writing of a lot of different kinds. You're trying to save your audience time and saving them money. But if I can make, we're going to go over this when we do cover letters, but if you can make the hiring manager's job easier That's a great first step forward, because we want it to be easy. If you can make your instructor's job easier, you can do that. Let's look at how did Swift appeal to the audience's need for convenience? You might say, oh, she didn't, because that was a pain in the ass to read. That was not convenient at all. But I would disagree.
With those headings she had on each.
Yes. Okay, 1, headings made it way easier. And 2, there's one other thing that she did to make it easy.
Conclusion? I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's actually it. The conclusion and the intro both say the exact same things. You're going to see this in a lot of academic writing. They tell you what you're about to read very clearly to respect you as a reader and say, if you're not interested in this, don't read it. But if you want to see how Bitzer's theory applies, this is what we're going to do. So I wanted to give that to you in terms of how this is what I call an essay map. It's not just my language, other writers call it this as well. She lays out the terrain of everything she's about to say. She literally says, these are her quotes. She says, first, I will outline the background of the women's rights movement. Then I'll define Bitzer's rhetorical situation. Then I'll apply Bitzer's theory to the t-shirt. Then I'll draw implications from the criticism of that t-shirt. And finally, I will conclude. She doesn't say, finally, I'll conclude. She ends there. But then the conclusion says, after understanding the background of the women's rights movement and a definition of Bitzer's rhetorical situation, we were able to use Bitzer's theory to show that the t-shirt was indeed an effective piece of rhetoric and also draw some practical implications for wearable rhetoric in the future. So this is basically exactly what I want you to do. This is what I'm going to go over in this essay. Now I'm doing it. This is what I just did. I read a really interesting comparison of rhetoric or presentation flow in America versus Japan. They said in America, your presentation should look like this. This is what I'm about to tell you. So if you want to stay along, you can. Now I'm telling you, and this is what I just told you. It's exactly what Swift does. It should have been super easy for you to skim and scan what she's doing and identify where you put your energy. Way easier than nearly anything we've read so far, even though the language was a little bit more advanced and it was an academic journal. Apparently in Japan, that's seen as insulting to your audience. You don't want to like tell your audience 3 times. You just want to build up to your point. Alas, we are in America, and so this essay map works very well. This is what I'm about to tell you. Now, what are you going to be writing about? Any number of these things that seem to be relevant to the audience. Swift was talking about political beliefs. So constraints are our beliefs and attitudes. They definitely constrain my behavior. But it's also these things. If you can show me that this course of action will help me survive, I am going to be way more likely to follow you. Right? Does that make sense? Questions, comments? We have 4 more minutes. There's way more we could, this is a giant long list, but this is kind of almost also just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how to understand the power of audience and constraints in Bitzer's model, and therefore like in your own communication with anybody. Questions, comments, concerns, criticisms?
For the discussion that's supposed to be revised tonight, is it going to just like be the same self-assessment wise?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for that question. They're all the same from here on out. The only time it will be different is if we have a big project due. So I wanted to keep it the same format of here's what I originally did, this is how I revised it, this is my self-assessment, and you have latitude in how you want your self-assessment to look like. I will say this, I did mean to say this. I do give bonuses for self-assessments that are either A, really thorough, like if I can tell that you did a lot of work on the self-assessment, I'll give you a bonus. And B, if your self-assessment is like very accurate. So if by the time if I read your self-assessment and I'm like, dang, I exactly agree with what you said, you get a bonus. So yeah, I mean, but if you're just like, this was B work and that's your entire self-assessment, that's not really great. But that also kind of cues to me that you're fine with that level of feedback. I actually thought on your first forum, the self-assessments were like remarkably, like I'd say 80% of people were like within 1 or 2 points of what I thought those discussion forums were. So good on you. It's great. Other questions? Thank you for that one. I always neglect these practical considerations. I'm like in my head, which means I'm a bad communicator because I'm not addressing the needs of the audience, which is y'all. Okay. The argument that we're reading next time is a book review. So it's kind of a little confusing, but we could say, like, why do people read book reviews instead of the entire book? And it is a book review of a critique of sexual culture on college campuses. You also have, for next week, you have 3 options of what you're going to read and do a rhetorical analysis of. There's an argument about high school sports, arguing that we should get rid of high school sports. We have one saying that the hookup culture is empowering for women and that it's a good thing, culturally speaking. The article that we read for Friday says that it's not. And then something about teamwork. If you're doing industrial or organizational psychology, I would do this last one. I think it's fantastic. They're all interesting though, I think. So this is previewing what's going on next week. Hopefully these notes will help you do that well. Questions? Comments? Well, I hope there's so much I want to do. I wish we could have compared this to other big issues in our country and other wearable rhetoric, namely the Black Lives Matter movement and why that's significant in our historical time period. Have you had any other teachers cancel class today for scholar strike? Do you know have you heard of what scholar strike is? Well, we're just going to go here because I wanted there to be more time to go over this, but I think as you can't see this. This is completely optional if you want. The provost is basically, there is a national organization, #ScholarStrike, that's similar, that's basically asking scholars to set aside time to raise awareness and prompt action against racism, policing, mass incarceration, and other symptoms of racism's toll in America, quote unquote. We have opportunity as an institution of higher education to foster these conversations around these difficult questions involving questioning around our own unconscious bias towards racism. This is something I want to pick up in full, and they let us know that this was happening yesterday. I'm like, I've already planned out my week, so however, I'm going to send some of this information in case you want to be more involved in this. But it is a direct extension of our conversation. The debate about abortion and how that ties into our identities if identify as pro-choice or pro-life, I think is really compelling in a lot of these other issues. in America today, nearly every single one. Questions, Bronwyn?
Is there a place we can find this email?
Yeah, I'll forward it to you.
Okay, thank you.
And then with the activity we did at the beginning of the class, was that just like for our notes? Or?
Yes. Yeah, I'm never going to collect any of that. I just wanted us to think about how our identities can affect how we process information. Okay, well, I'll be around if anybody would like to chat about any of this, or I think the 13th documentary on Netflix is a pretty good place if you want to educate yourself on the American history that we don't learn about in schools. It blew me away. Cool.
All right, thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.